Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on EPR for packaging and bottle bills. How can they coexist? My name is Martin Suberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association, NEWMOA, and I'm joined by Megan Fontes, Executive Director of the Northeast Recycling Coalition. As part of our work together, NEWMOA and NERC are co-hosting this event today. As you can see, this event is taking place on the GoToWebinar platform. A few things about this platform and how the presentation will go. The webinar is being recorded. Materials will be made available on our website after this program. Our program today is to hear from our three great presenters first, and then to open it up to questions for the last 30 minutes or so. All attendees other than the presenters will be on mute during the presentation. There's a question button for you to ask your questions on. So please feel free to enter your questions, and I will make sure that we are getting as many of them as possible to our presenters. If you can't use the question button, try the chat function, but usually the question button works very well in these formats. So now let us get going with this important program and our three terrific speakers. We're going to hear first from Peter Spendelow of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Peter has been working on bottle bill recycling and materials management issues since the late 1970s, first with a group that is now called Zero Waste Washington, and then with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality since 1985, where he helped implement Oregon's second largest recycling related legislation, the Oregon Recycling Opportunity Act of 1983. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to make you the presenter now, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay. So, okay, here we go. I'm going to show my screen here and turn off my camera. So you've got, here we go. Okay, so let's get right into this. First, oops, hold on a second. First, a quick outline of what I'm going to be presenting. First, I'm going to talk about the Oregon Bottle Bill, how it came about, or really how it sort of morphed over time from sort of an individual company producer responsibility program to something that's much more like the producer responsibility programs that we have now. Then I'm going to talk about why Oregon decided to adopt a new legislation on giving producers responsibility for proper management of packaging, printed paper, and food serviceware throughout their whole life cycle. Give you some features of what we call the Oregon Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, or we commonly just shortened to Recycling Modernization Act, and then getting to the heart of what this is about, how the new law interacts with our bottle bill and how they coexist with each other. So let's first start out with the bottle bill. We've had a long time, back from 1971 when it first passed, and it really was a litter and recycling bill to begin with, and it's continued that way. But it was a producer responsibility bill. It put the people who distribute beverages and who sell beverages, gave them responsibility to take those containers back, that they would have to accept, the stores would have to accept back empty containers and pay a refund value, 5 cents at the time. And the distributors would have to go to those stores and pick up the empties and repay the stores that same deposit. So, but again, back then it was individual businesses who were responsible. There was no producer responsibility organization taking overall control. Our original law only covered beer and soft drink. We had a 5 cent deposit, which was a lot of money back in 1971, but became less and less effective over the years. It was unchanged for 46 years in spite of inflation. And we didn't have any handling fee. That we're different from many of the states back east in that there's no handling fee. There's no incentive for anybody to set up a redemption center because they wouldn't get paid anything. And so we had entirely returned to retail for many, many years. But it was in 2007 that we had new legislation that significantly changed things. And it's funny that, as I think back on it, the biggest impact might have not been one of the things that we thought was important at the time. You know, we thought what was really important was the 2007 bill added water to our bottle bill, because, you know, back in 1971, you didn't see people selling single-serve bottles of water, but that really took off, of course. And so we added water to our bottle bill effective 2009. And we created a bottle bill task force, which was looking at what changes we should do, what additional beverages we should add, should we change the deposit and things like that. But the little sneaker thing that really had an impact was, back originally, stores only had to take back the brands of containers they sell. But as we got more and more store brands, it became more confusing to the public, because they would buy a container at Fred Meyer's, which is a Kroger store, and you would have a store brand there. And then they go to some other grocery store to return it, and they wouldn't be able to do it. The store would refuse it because it wasn't a brand that one sold. So the legislature required that large stores, those over 5,000 square feet, must take back all deposit containers of the type they sell. Any brand, whether, you know, if they sell beer, they have to take back any beer. If they sell soft drink, they have to take back any soft drink. And what this led to is the distributors realized that, you know, say you're a small distributor in Portland and you sell a beverage and somebody takes it out to Bend and they return it there. You're legally responsible for going to Bend and picking it up from the store where they returned it. You know, that's obviously not going to be very efficient. But if they join together in a cooperative, then the cooperative could arrange for that collection, and you wouldn't have to drive your truck all the way out to Bend. Instead, the cooperative could pick it up for you. And this led to the formation of the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, or OBRC, which in fact has become a de facto producer responsibility organization. So anyway, just to follow up on the bottle bill, we did pass, based on what the bottle bill task force recommended, 4 years later, we did pass a bill that raised the deposit to 10 cents and also added a number of beverages, juices, teas, everything except for wine, liquor, milk, and milk substitutes. That went into, it was implemented in 2018. And they also set up a pilot redemption center project where the distributors and the grocers would get together to set up redemption center and make it so the stores within the convenience zone of that redemption center wouldn't have to take back containers. And that took off. And again, OBRC has really acted as a producer responsibility organization and really done a lot of innovations. So one of the things they did was set up a large number of redemption options. They have, I think, about 23 of the full line redemption centers. And then they've developed these programs where stores can have individual redemption at their stores, very convenient redemption through what we call the Green Bag Program. I think overall there are about 90 facilities now where you can return these green bags throughout the state, and they're continuing to expand. They've just been expanding this like crazy, and they're continuing to do that. So the way the green bag system works is that consumers set up an account with the OBRC, and tens of thousands of Oregonians have done this. In fact, hundreds of thousands, I believe. And so they set up an account, and they purchase these green bags for a small price, and they get labels with their barcode on it that shows it's their account. All they have to then do is just fill that bag and take it to a kiosk and then just drop it inside the kiosk, and they can go away. They don't have to stand there and feed containers into a reverse vending machine or, you know, do that sort of thing. It's very quick and easy to just drop it off. OBRC will then pick up those bags. They'll run them through a counter. They'll scan, you know, for the barcode so they know which account is, and they will add the money from those deposits to the person's account. And then that person can go in multiple places. For instance, many stores have kiosks where they can go and withdraw those funds. And if they do that in the store, a bunch of the stores will give them a 20% bonus. Instead of giving 10 cents back, they'll give 12 cents back for those containers if they use that in the store. So again, really inventive things that have, they borrowed this from Maine, by the way, but really have expanded a lot. They have a blue bag program for nonprofits that provide a lot of funds to nonprofits over the years. They have new technology that really speeds up the count of containers. And one of the things that I think is really exciting, it's really hard to do just in a small state, is bringing back refillable bottles. They have the bottle drop bottle, and they have a number of breweries and even a winery and a couple of others who are using these refillable bottles. The difficulty is if the distributors distribute a lot of stuff out of state, we lose those bottles, and that kind of reduces the value of a refillable program. But for those who are mainly doing stuff in Oregon, this works really well for them. We get back nice clean containers, and we don't have all that waste of creating containers for single use. And again, the programs have really expanded with all this work. We had seen the redemption rate for beverages fall to in the mid 60s back before the deposit went up to 10 cents and before we added these new beverages. And things have really rebounded. They took a hit during COVID, but we just saw a report from OBRC that they now have an 88% redemption rate. That's really high. And that they've redeemed more than 2 billion containers in 2022. Again, that's a record number of containers redeemed. So why did we go ahead then and pursue our new Recycling Modernization Act and pursue producer responsibility? Well, actually, what triggered this was when China banned the importation of most recyclables. This sent a shockwave through the whole system, and we realized that there were problems with our system, that our recycling was getting dirtier and dirtier because Chinese buyers had been purchasing this very dirty recycling. And so what we wanted to do was improve the quality of our recycled material. We wanted to have a system to create financial incentives for the packagers to produce better packaging, such as not putting polyvinyl chloride labels on a PET bottle, which of course makes, those two resins are incompatible with each other and makes it difficult to recycle them. We knew there was a lot of consumer confusion, and we wanted to create a more uniform statewide program. And basically, we just thought that, currently producers have no role in our system. It's all paid for by the citizens and the program set up by the local governments and the recycling collection service providers, and the producers just produce their stuff and walk away from it. We thought they should at least play a role in managing the materials they create throughout the whole life cycle of those materials. So again, this is the part of the problem we face. What we see here is from East Java, piles of plastic just out in the fields. But this isn't from plastics recycling. This is from paper recycling. This is material that was shipped over to Asia with lots of garbage in it. And it's not, it's from all over the world that they were receiving this material. And they don't have the solid waste management system we do here. They don't have the good system of landfills. So this paper mill simply dumps the stuff out in the field after they're done with it. And the last thing we want to do as Oregonians is go and think we're doing the right thing, recycling our paper and recycling our plastics, putting it, sending it off to the commingled recycling facilities to sort it out, only to have it go to Asia, end up in places like this, and end up washing back into the ocean and floating back to Oregon. So this is one of the things we really, wanted to work on. And we had data already from a study that we did in 2010 showing that this was a problem. And by the way, we're repeating the study right now. As we speak, we have a crew out at West Rock Recycling doing the same sort of work that we did in this study, looking at the materials that go into a commingled recycling processing facility after they've been sorted, what they put in the bales to see what's there, and doing it on a mass balance perspective. So for instance, when we look at the plastic containers, the bottles and tubs that people properly prepared, they were the right type of plastic, they probably put it in their bin, they sent it off to the commingled recycling processing facility. Where did those plastic containers ended up? And what we found is that 84% of them did end up in plastic bales. That's what we wanted. But look at this, 14% almost ended up in paper, between newspaper and cardboard. That's to me is a huge amount, a huge waste. It's difficult to sort that material out once you've mixed it all together, because some of those plastic bottles get crushed and they get hidden under the paper when it's going down the line, and they act like paper because they're flattened. And so they end up in paper bales, and we figure we need to improve that. And it was even worse for aluminum cans, where you can see that we lost almost a third of the aluminum cans, again, to the same problems. Now, I will note that in Oregon, there are very few aluminum cans in our curbside program because, of course, most of them are returned under the bottle bill. And so aluminum cans only made up 0.3% of all the incoming material. And since there were so few, a number of our processors had not invested in things like eddy current separators to separate out the aluminum cans. But again, that's a huge loss. And we want to see better than that. And just to show you, here's an example. showing the back end of the paper, what's coming out of it. The stuff that's weighing is the fibers got pulled out. You can see all the plastic containers falling out of there. This is from about 12 years ago. So, but I think it's still continuing. We're still having that sort of problems. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about some of the features of our Recycling Modernization Act. I don't have time to do all of them, but you can find out a lot from our website. But one important thing is that unlike many other programs, our program is not going to be entirely funded by the producers. It does not replace our existing collection system. Oregon has franchised garbage collection almost entirely throughout the state. And this is very different from what many of you experience in the Northeast, where you have municipal collection, or you have haulers being hired to provide these collection services. Here, the local governments will give a garbage hauler exclusive right to pick up garbage in the territory. And in return, that garbage hauler must provide the recycling services required by state law, and must provide, their rates will be regulated so they can't gouge the public. And they also have to provide other sorts of things, including providing a small franchise fee to the, usually the government will charge a small franchise fee. And what this does is create great incentives for strong recycling programs, because the local governments, instead of like where the local governments have garbage and recycling as being an expense, here the local governments see that as a revenue source, because the citizens are paying the rates right to the garbage companies, and the local government's picking up a small franchise fee on top of that. So it's a revenue source for them. And the garbage haulers also have a strong incentive to provide good recycling programs, because they have basically a guaranteed rate of return for their expenses. And so the larger their business is, the more they do, the more profit they get. So an interesting sort of thing there. And that's why we're really happy with our recycling programs that exist, and we didn't want to turn that over to a pro to take that over, because we think we're doing a good job. One feature we have is that we can have more than one producer responsibility organization. That might be a problem. If we have multiple ones, it's going to be really hard to coordinate them, but that's what's in our law. All producers of printed packaging and of packaging, printed paper, and food serviceware are required to join a pro unless they're exempt. And we're required that the member fees that the pros charge must provide incentives for producers to produce better packaging or product, that not put those PVC labels on top of a PET package, for instance, or not do other things that make stuff not recyclable or poor environmental choices. We do not allow cross-subsidization between materials, which means basically that the plastics people need to pay for the plastics-related programs, and the paper people need to pay for the paper-related programs. We're going to have a single list statewide of what goes in the commingled recycling bins. So, and we have a lot of responsibilities that pros have to take on. They have to help expand recycling to rural areas where it's not currently being provided. They have to pay the cost of transporting recyclables if they're collected more than 50 miles from a nearest processor, and that's been a big problem for us in the past, that our Eastern Oregon recyclers have to spend a lot to get stuff and then move it to Portland, which is where the processors are. So that will be paid for by the producers now. They have to pay for the removing contaminants that are covered products from the commingled recycling. And there's something called the commodity risk fee that they'll keep paying, which basically is a subsidy, so that when the price for recyclables are low, at least the haulers can drop off the materials on average at no cost, instead of having to pay a tip fee of $50 or $100 or whatever it is at the moment. So again, when prices go down, that fee will increase, and it will help stabilize the price of recycling. The other things they must do is set up a collection system for materials that are not in the standard commingled list. Think of things like film plastic, for instance. We don't want that to be in the commingled. Now, we haven't decided exactly what is going to be in that list yet. We're still working on it, but I think film plastic is a really good example of something that might be there. And then the pros have to meet target rates for recycling of plastic packaging and food serviceware. 25% by the year 2028 and 50% by the year 2040. They're going to have to develop some innovative programs to get us up there. And one of the key things that they must, with the process, must ensure that recyclables go only to responsible end markets. They have to fund a waste generation program. And one thing I didn't put in here is they have to pay local governments up to $3 per person per year for education and promotion and other activities that will reduce contamination and lead to more recycling. So there's a lot that they're going to need to do. The commingled recycling processing facilities also have requirements. We'll have permits on them, and the main intent of those permits is to make sure the materials are sorted effectively and make sure we have a system in place that the materials, after they've been sorted out, go to what we call a responsible end market. They do not end up in a field in Java or something like that. So just some quick implementation of things here. Our law passed in 2021. The main requirements go into effect as of July 1, 2025. We're going to need every minute of our time between us and our advisors in implementing this thing. We have lots of major studies going on. I mentioned the one we're doing on outbound recycling and on inbound recycling. We have technical work groups. We have rule advisory committees. We've hired a bunch of new staff. We're doing a whole lot of work. There's a link here that you can go to find out more about it. But honestly, the quick way to do it is just Google Oregon Recycling Modernization Act, and you can get right to our thing that way. So let's just finish off here with a big question. Can EPR for packaging and bottle bills coexist? Well, bottle bills are EPR packaging legislation. And the way we do it here, it is done almost exactly like many other EPR programs. The sole exception is that the producers do not have to produce a program plan, which is approved by local government. They've just done all this all alone. And honestly, I would love to see a program plan. I'm just very happy that our organization here has been very progressive and it's done so much without the government stepping in and requiring these sorts of things. One thing that our law does is exempts bottle bill material from being covered products. So the bottle bill people will not have to pay in. And this was a choice we made, because of course there are some beverage containers that end up being put out in curbside bins. But we figured that the bottle bill was an EPR program on its own that was very accessible, and we didn't think that they had to pay twice into 2 different programs when they have their own program that's so strong. Now, I know a lot of people don't want bottle bills because they're worried about, if you take out the aluminum cans, can those curbside programs exist? Well, we've never had many of those aluminum cans in there, and yet we have, some of the strongest curbside programs throughout the nation here. Really, I think somewhere on the order of 85% of our people have on-route collection provided to them. So, and my view is you shouldn't subsidize the curbside recycling by putting in something valuable. You don't want to put valuable things into a less effective program. You want the things that have the highest value, which is aluminum cans. The energy involved with them is huge. You want them to be in our most effective programs, and that's the bottle bill. And then this last thing I want to point out is that the wine industry has an interesting choice here, because wine is not covered under a bottle bill. And the legislature basically told the wine industry, hey, you've got to choose. Do you want to be in this new EPR program and pay fees to a pro, or do you want to be in the bottle bill program and pay the costs there? And the wine industry is trying to figure that out. We did have a law passed that wine cans will be added to the bottle bill as of July 1, 2025, the same date that the EPR bill goes into effect. But if the whole wine industry wants to be there, they have the opportunity to lobby the legislature, which I'm sure would agree, to add wine to the bottle bill. And that would get them out of our this EPR program and put them in under the bottle bill EPR program. So just in closing here, I just wanted to talk again a little bit about the bottle bill and curbside recycling, and why I think we want to have a bottle bill even when we have curbside recycling. And first of all, again, the recovery containers is much higher than in curbside recycling. We get that significant loss of PET and aluminum through the commingled recycling programs that you don't get under a bottle bill, and of course glass. You don't want glass in the in the curbside bins because it breaks and it's very abrasive, very damaging to the equipment. The bottle bill produces such clean, quality material, like you can see here. And we have, for instance, a local business, ORPET, set up to take back the bottle bill plastic because we have so much of it being generated, such a clean stream of it. So they set that up here, and we're not having to ship that overseas to markets. We're just processing right here in Oregon. And bottle bills address the litter issue too, which is something curbside recycling programs don't do. So that's about it. I just wanted to thank you, and I'll turn this back over, and then I'll be available for Q&A at the end.
Thank you very much, Peter. Much appreciated. Next, we're going to hear from Heidi Sanborn. Heidi is the founding director of both the California Product Stewardship Council and the National Stewardship Action Council. With over 32 years of experience being a leader in the solid waste industry, Heidi is a national expert on producer responsibility and product stewardship. Heidi, welcome, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. And I think now I need to have the screen turned over. Can you there we go. Show my screen and I'll get this bigger and then we'll start from the beginning. Perfect. So again, I'm so happy to be here to talk about this. This is actually an area of interest. I think there was almost 600 people registered today. So I think a lot of people are interested in this discussion of EPR for packaging and recycling refunds. Can they coexist? So again, I work with the National Stewardship Action Council that I founded to advocate for a circular and equitable economy in the United States. And we do that through waste management or materials management policies. And we just hit our 8-year mark. And I'm very proud of our ability to take a lot of the policies we've done here in California and bring them nationally. Like we're working on a national flushable wipes labeling bill, truth in labeling of recycling. This is me keynoting at the WasteCon conference in San Diego this December. I might have seen some of you there, but we really do want to see producers fairly share in the responsibility for a circular and equitable economy. And I want to talk quickly about what a circular economy means to us. When I talk about that, I'm hearing a lot of language like, let's go circular. Well, that, it's different than recycling. Recycling is recycling. There's source reduction, which is the first tier of the achieving a circular economy, is to design waste and pollution out of the system. Then keep products and materials in motion, which is composting and recycling. And then go back and regenerate the natural systems that we've harmed. I just wanted to point this out because the only bill I know of in the world that has done all three of these things is the bill that we passed on EPR for packaging in California last year, SB 54. And I was one of the 25 key negotiators, and I will get into that quickly. But I wanted to say thank you to my board, who works very, very hard and doesn't get a lot of credit. I'm sure you know a lot of these people. And we also have a 501c3 that's national because we do work on EPA grants and some other education items. And I also want to talk about what a bottle bill is because as Peter said, most bottle bills are producer run. That is not the case in California. We are the only ones in the US that I know of that is not run by the producers. The government has over 200 employees in CalRecycle running the bottle bill. And the producer payments to me are not nearly large enough. And I don't think it affects design. I don't think it does all the things that I like EPR for. So we have a very different bottle bill. I could do an entire 4-hour discussion about it, and we will not have time for that today. So I'm just going to let you know the California bottle bill is very different than the others in the United States. I would not use it as a model. I could go on and on about that. But there is a great PowerPoint the Container Recycling Institute did about bottle bills if you have any questions about them. We like to call them now recycling refunds. The reason is that the Can Manufacturers Institute did a survey, a study, and found that the public is kind of, in some states, they don't like the term bill. They like recycling refund. This term is way better perceived by the vast majority of Americans. So that's how we're talking about it, is recycling refunds. So if you hear me switch back and forth, that's why, but it means the same thing. And now we're working on a national bottle bill, and I just want to make sure you know about this because only 10 states have bottle bills now. Litter is out of control across the country. And there was a study done by Keep America Beautiful, which I have a link to in the next slide, that says that you will attain much higher cleanliness rates in your community overall if you get a bottle bill in your state. Over 50% of containers collected from the 10 bottle bill states are from the 10 bottle bill states. And the manufacturers need those back for the next generation of products. So now they're stepping up. They want to support bottle bills, recycling refunds, and or EPR for packaging if it includes them. So we'll talk about all of that. And the solution again is just to get recycling refunds and, bottle bills. And here's the link to the Keep America Beautiful study if you're interested, but 50% less litter there were in the recycling refund states, and 30% less litter in the waterways. So these really do work, deposit return systems. Susan Collins has calculated, she's an engineer, and she has calculated 10.3 million additional tons will be recycled annually if we got the other 40 states to have a bottle bill. And it's very obvious why we want to get bottle bills passed, because they work. Deposit return systems see much higher recycling rates than in states that don't. I mean, West Virginia is at 2%, Maine's at 72. That pretty much speaks volumes. And a shout out to our friends over at Upstream. They're working on reuse and refill policy. And he did a whole blog on what comes first, EPR or deposit return systems. So I thought I wanted to link that for you, and you're happy to watch it, obviously. But Upstream's position has been and continues to be that EPR and DRS policies should be about creating a circular economy for packaging, and we totally agree with this, prioritizing source reduction and reuse above recycling. So the original DRS programs in the United States were actually created by beer, soda, and dairy companies, and I'm old enough to remember this, when they were all being washed and refilled. I literally had containers and cases of Coca-Cola bottles, just like the one in that picture behind Matt, that we would return to our gas station and buy a new crate. And that's how it went. And the milk was in a metal container outside our front door. Glass bottles all got reused and washed. And we really got away from that, obviously, and that has caused a lot of pollution and waste. And the EU is going this direction as well, meaning preventing of the creation of packaging is first and foremost. And state bills, there's been, I think, 12 bottle bills introduced this year in this country. Some states that have bottle bills are modernizing them, but there's a lot of discussion again from the large manufacturers. They cannot meet their sustainability targets for recycled content and reducing carbon if we do not get bottle bills in every state. And they don't want a different rule in every state. So we really truly believe it's time for a national bottle bill. We believe it's going to be introduced very soon. I'm working with Senator Merkley from Oregon and his team on this. He just said it at a World Wildlife Fund Plastic Summit I was presenting at about bottle bills just 2 weeks ago, that they're very confident they're going to get it introduced in the next few months. So, and we are working with them on that. So we were there lobbying the end of March, and you can see us there. If anybody's interested in this effort, let us know. Otherwise, we'll just keep pounding on every state to have a different bottle bill until we can get the national done. But we sure hope that we can get it done. And I can tell you, I'm very hopeful. There's a lot of positivity from both parties and the independents that we met with, that this is the time to get it done in the United States. So just want to make sure you know all that. And also, the way we were able to get success on the EPR for all packaging in California and going back to refillables in our bottle bill was through the work I've done on the California Foundation on the Environment and the Economy. I joined the board in 2018 and told them, hey, you do study trips with legislators, you do energy and water and these other things. We need them to understand waste management. They don't know, they just have all these lobbyists coming at them, but they've never seen it. And so we started a recycling challenge study trip, which Alan was incredibly helpful when he was with Return It at getting us to see their facilities, and it changed everything. This is us at the Oregon trip in 2020, where I was there with State Treasurer Fiona Ma, who's there, and Senator Ben Allen and Senator Dodd. And we were learning about the refillables bottle program. And in fact, Sydney Comlager at the bottom picture far left is now in Congress, and she came back and introduced a bill to bring refillables back to our bottle bill program. That's how much it changed them, and more. I could get into more details, but if you get to do study trips with your legislators, I highly recommend it, and I'd be happy to coach you on how to do it. We also saw the Return It containers. These are repurposed shipping containers that Alan had done with Return It that are express and go sites, bag drops basically. and you just have the program on your phone, very much like what Peter was talking about that they have in Oregon. And the reason I like this is there's these large parking lots that really, there's nothing there. The store does not want these things that we put our mouth on in their store. So this to them is palatable. It's outside. It's self-serve. It helps create more loyalty of their customers. The receipts can be used in the store as discounts on the products. It creates some security because they've got a security camera, and if there's any troublemaking going on, they send out their security trucks. So, and they even pay them $500 a month to use the site, the parking lot. So this is a win-win because we've had a lot of kickback from the retailers. They do not want to be mandated to return anything. They're concerned that even if it's just bottles and cans, that's the slippery slope to everything else. And they have thousands of SKUs. So this to me is a great win-win, a great business collaboration between the retailer and the producers. We also saw some of their other drop-offs. This is one where they're actually returning everything from not just your bottles and cans, but also it had fluorescent lamps and batteries. And there were other EPR programs who were joining in. And again, a lot of legislators there and a lot of great allies that we work with. And then we did last year, Maine and Montreal. You can see me here with Eric from Clink, and we're doing the bag drop. We don't have these in California. We have very messy igloos, and we've lost a lot of our convenience over time. Again, the government's running the program. It's not able to move quickly. There's a lot of reasons, and I could, again, do a whole class just on our bottle bill and what's wrong with it. But we loved Maine's drop-off program and Oregon's, and really think there's got to be a lot more convenience and a lot more ways for people to return things quickly. I also want to share that I was chair of the statewide commission on recycling markets and curbside recycling in California for 2 years. And we came up with a lot of recommendations on the bottle bill on how to make it better. They're linked to this hyperlink here, but I don't have time to get into all of them. But I do want to share that this was the hardest thing. We had to get consensus votes of 17 people, and we still got 34 policy recommendations, which is great. But we also had the hardest time getting agreement around the bottle bill. It's the oldest of our programs, but the way I explained how it got passed was it was like pigs feeding at a trough. The money is going everywhere because they had to kind of buy off sectors to gain their support to pass the bill. So there's money going in all directions. There's very few people who understand all the dynamics of our bottle bill. And so that's been part of the problem of getting any changes to it to make it work better. So it's now a 35-year-old bottle bill. The government runs it. 62% is the return rate for 2020. I think that's dropped. And thankfully, we got support from the wine industry a few years ago to add wine and spirits. They had fought it up until a few years ago. Why did they change their mind? Same thing. They could not get enough wine, glass back to make the next generation of wine bottles. They were literally a few years ago having to import them from France because they couldn't even get enough wine bottles to put wine in wine country. So they joined the bottle bill. I think it becomes official in a year or so. And the biggest complaint we've got of our bottle bill is the public. When I was chair of the Recycling Commission, the most comments we got from the public were they're really, really upset that they paid deposits and the place that they used to take those bottles and cans to get that money back is gone. We've lost hundreds of collection locations in California, and people are really upset. And I can even say it's sad. We had a gentleman on a bicycle with bags of recyclables showing up at Susan Collins' door in Culver City at her home because he found her online. He was riding his bike miles trying to get the money back, and he just needed it for dinner. And he started crying on her porch. That is not how this program should work after 35 years. So anyway, don't use California as the model. If you go for a bill, talk to us. And you know, we're very proud to have helped make the big thing happen, the big kahuna, I call it, which is SB 54, the EPR bill for packaging in California that passed last year. And as I said, this is, I think, the most important bill in the world because it's getting producers to pay not only for recycling, but to be responsible for source reduction and for just so much. There's actually so much in there. I'll have to get into it. But it did exempt beverage containers in the bottle bill. That's how these are going to coexist. And that's, I totally supported that, because even though our bottle bill isn't working, it's a completely different system. And to merge them all together would have been so confusing. This was hard enough to do as it was with this huge category of packaging, all the different stakeholders that we have in it. So we did exempt medical product packaging, infant formula, bottle bills, and then covered materials that have recycling rates of 65% for 3 consecutive years prior to 2027 are exempt. Why is that? Because they've done the good work early. We're trying to give incentives for companies to move quickly to recycle more now, not just wait for the bill. And the key features, I call this EPR 3.0 plus. It includes source reduction mandates. It has infrastructure protection and investment for the haulers and the cities. So if they've already invested in their packaging collection system, what we said, this is additive. The producers are going to have to negotiate with those haulers and those local governments. If they want to see them collect more or sort better, and they can help them buy the machine and negotiate who maintains it, how long it runs, all those things. We have new enforcement tools in this bill, like if they fail, the state can revoke the PRO. That has never been done before as far as I know. And that to me was the Heidi clause, is what they called it, because we want to make sure this works. And if it fails California, we want to be able to take the keys away. So that is in there. Hopefully we don't, believe me, we want this to work. And there's robust transparency requirements in this bill, so everybody can track what's happening. And then we made the polluter pay for remediation. Producers are going to pay, and this is not a typo, $5 billion over 10 years to California, starting in 2027, to remediate all the plastic pollution and the pollution that we have from packaging across the state. And 60% of it must go to low-income, disadvantaged, and rural communities. We are extremely proud of this, and hope you're as pleased with it as we are. So this got signed into law last June. It was a Herculean effort on many, many, many people's parts. You saw the pictures earlier. We had the Cal Chamber, we had Oceana, we had me, we had the waste haulers, we had Republic and Waste WM. We worked very, very hard together to get to this place. And again, the fines are $50,000 a day up to. So those are big, and then the revoking of the PRO. So there's a huge backstop to make sure this works. If you're interested in learning more, we have a working group on this. So if you join us, you can join this working group. I think we've had our 3rd meeting. We're gonna have our 4th next Friday. This is going to be a long process of following the regs and getting stakeholders who never have worked together before to understand each other and how it's gonna work and what's in or out, what's a covered product and what isn't. But bottle bill is not covered under the EPR system. So there can be peace in the world. DRS and EPR for packaging can and do coexist. Proof is in the fact it already exists. And Alan's going to talk about that, and he's the expert in that because he's been running these programs for years. So I'll save the time for him. But we prefer to get DRS, the deposit return systems, first, and then you put the EPR for packaging as a separate program and separate NGOs. And we believe the time is right to push for the national DRS, but that won't stop us from pushing for states to do the same in the meantime until it's done. So that's it. And I hope that was helpful. I'm happy to take questions at the end, but we'll turn it over now to Alan to give us his expertise, many years of expertise in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate that. Just want to give a brief introduction. Alan Langdon is the Chief Executive Officer for Circular Materials, a national not-for-profit responsibility organization established to support producers with meeting their obligations under extended producer responsibility regulations across Canada. As CEO, Alan is responsible for leading Circular Materials through the development of Ontario's new Blue Box system, while expanding the organization's operations into other provinces. Alan, Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation. We're having a hard time hearing you, Alan.
How about now?
Now we can hear you.
Perfect. Sorry, new computer, new system. My apologies. I'm just going to share my, can you see my screen?
We are seeing your, yes, now we see it. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks everyone for joining today. Just going to minimize some stuff. And yeah. No, why this is proving so difficult. Okay. Okay, I'll go to the first slide. So Circular Materials, a national not-for-profit producer responsibility organization created and governed by producers. Our producers, and I'll get into who they are, wanted the opportunity to have some self-determinacy on how these regulations would roll out and how they'd be able to meet them. And so they wanted to ensure they had a not-for-profit that was created and governed by producers that would oversee the delivery of their obligations within these different jurisdictions in Canada. So I'm currently working in Ontario, which is the largest province in the country. We also are implementing programs in New Brunswick later this year, as well as Alberta in 2025. And then we support a number of jurisdictions, and I'll talk about that later. So we provide full service offering to support producers, which includes comprehensive compliance solutions, national harmonization of producer services and recycling supply chains. And then probably most exciting is one of our goals is to actually return materials to producers to meet the recycled content goals. These are our founders. Not all these companies will be known to you, but certainly there's a number of these companies that are also large companies in the United States. You know, Keurig Dr. Pepper, Kraft Heinz, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Clorox, all well-known recognized brands in the United States. We have 17 founders. They're also board members, and they're also investors, in that they put seed capital to make circular materials a reality. And it's a large board, but it's in keeping with the mandate that this be completely producer governed and have an appropriate level of producer oversight. So my job is really to make sure that we're meeting the obligations and the objectives of the producer community in Canada. Now, beyond what makes this program so interesting, printed paper and packaging EPR, is it represents a number of sectors. So many of the companies you saw in the last slide are some of the largest companies in Canada and some of the largest producers of printed paper and packaging. But we also represent a number of sectors outside what's represented at our board. And so this is really a snapshot of the various sectors that are actually included under these regulations. So it's quite extensive. And it means that we end up representing thousands of companies in each of these jurisdictions, or maybe hundreds of companies in each of these jurisdictions in meeting their regulatory obligations. So in terms of our presence across Canada, as I said, we're in Ontario right now. There's a 3-year transition that starts in July, and then we will take on full responsibility for the entire province starting in January 2026 under a full EPR program. We're going to be implementing a full EPR program in New Brunswick in late 2023, and then also overseeing the launch of a full EPR program in Alberta in 2025. We also serve as the service provider for some of the legacy programs in Canada, Recycle BC, Multi-Material Stewardship Western, Multi-Material Stewardship Manitoba, all printed paper and packaging programs, as well as the legacy printed paper and packaging program in Ontario, Stewardship Ontario, and their automotive material stewardship program. We're currently involved in consultations in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, and the Yukon, which is one of our territories, and then monitoring activity in Prince Edward Island, probably be the last jurisdiction in Canada to implement EPR for packaging. So in addition to having that kind of compliance role and wanting to make sure that we're meeting the compliance objectives of each of these programs, as an organization, we're also intimately involved and excited about the opportunity to build circular supply chains. So we're designing recycling supply chains not just to meet a regulatory obligation, but also to make sure that this material can be collected, recycled, and then actually returned to producers. And we believe that this enhanced closed loop system will help minimize waste, ensure these materials are reused again and again, advance innovation, increase performance, reduce the need for virgin resources, and of course, above all else, deliver improved environmental outcomes, which is ultimately our mission. In terms of advancing the circular economy, we're supporting producers with achieving greater circularity through the greater access to their materials. So these recycling supply chains, like I said, really have two functions, and we're able to map material all the way through the cycle, but we're trying to ensure that we can support producers with their provincial EPR compliance, then also return their materials to producers to meet the recycled content goals, as well as, in Canada at least, upcoming federal recycled content standards for plastic packaging. And now I'm just going to talk a little bit about Ontario, because right now this is where all of the action is going on in Canada. So we're preparing for a launch of a full EPR program in Ontario on July 1st, 2023. The regulation defines packaging and paper, including beverage containers, and producers that sell packaging and paper, including beverage containers, are required to meet management targets based on the amount of material supplied to consumers. Oh, and just maybe before I go into that, so those rates will be material specific for the blue box materials. So for rigid plastic packaging, I believe it's 55%. For flexibles, it's 25%. Both those targets come into place in the end of 2026. For paper, it's 80 or 85%. And then glass, I believe, is 75%. So those are targets set for the collection of materials through the residential blue box. So for us, there's also, as we prepare for this launch, we're working with a partner organization, the Canadian Beverage Container Recycling Association, and this will influence some of my comments in terms of how we manage these systems, because there's other options, including a deposit system. So we've formed a partnership with this group to develop a comprehensive recycling program for beverage containers in Ontario, one that takes into account not only the collection system, but also an out-of-home system. We've done this because both organizations are going to need to work in parallel to meet a beverage recovery rate of 75% by 2026 and 2030 by 80%. So that will be done without a deposit system, one where we are maximizing the collection of containers through the residential blue box system, and then CBCRA as a partner is working through the commercial and municipal public space sectors to increase the collection of containers through that. So what makes beverage containers different in the Ontario context than any other material is most EPR programs for packaging are limited to residential material. In this context in Ontario, there's an overall beverage container target, which includes both residential and commercial. And so we're working with this partner to meet. And so that recovery rate is not just for material in the residential stream, that's for every beverage container put into the market in Ontario. We need to meet a 75% recovery rate by the end of 2026. If we don't meet that rate, then the producers, the individual producers, are subject to administrative monetary penalties issued by the third-party oversight agency, RIPRA, which is the regulator here in Ontario. So how will the Ontario system work? Beverage container producers will pay a container recycling fee set by CBCRA to cover both blue box and away from home collection management costs. Producers will report their producer supply data annually to us, and their beverage supply data monthly to circular materials through our national reporting portal. Beverage reporting capabilities within the portal allow for producers to have a one-stop shop for reporting. From there, so if I can, there'll be a container recycling fee on each container. That container will pay for blue box and away from home collection and management costs. All the reporting is done both on an annual and a monthly basis through our portal. And then we will take the revenue from the CRFs will be also submitted to Circular Materials. We will take our portion or deduct our portion of the revenue to cover the beverage container management costs in the common collection system, and then remit the remainder to CBCRA that will use it for promotion and education, as well as establishing and maintaining an away from home and commercial collection and management system. So I want to talk about the Ontario context first, because that's what I'm working in right now, and one where we're trying to do some innovative work in terms of meeting a common recovery rate objective. And now I'll talk a little bit about British Columbia as well, where I've worked previously. So previously, I held the role as the CEO for Return It, which is operates British Columbia's deposit system. It's also known otherwise as Encore Pacific Canada. Like my current organization, it's a not-for-profit stewardship agency, and its specific role is managing the beverage container deposit program in BC. And they've been appointed by the producers to fulfill their regulatory requirement under the recycling regulations beverage container product category. That program includes all ready-to-drink beverage containers, which includes soft drinks, juice, water, wine, coolers, and spirits, plus non-refillable beer bottles. And when I say all, so just an example of items you might not necessarily think would be in a deposit system. So things like bag-in-a-box wine, so that box wine would be in, as well as flexible containers like a Kool-Aid jammer. That would also be within the program, and those containers would carry a deposit on them. In terms of its success, the program's achieved an overall recovery rate of 75.9%. 93% of BC's population has access to a beverage container return facility. They have 163 depots, and this is based on last year's annual report. I know some of these numbers have gone up. So Heidi kindly showed one of the Express and Go facilities. And I would just, one correction I would make, it's not $500 a month that we paid. We actually paid $500 a year. For the retailers that we worked on those Express and Go standalone container facilities, for them, really the monetary compensation for having the beverage container Express and Go on their property was virtually nil. For them, the value was that they no longer had to take their labor, primarily union labor, and have to manage containers in their small back office or small back room. They could actually have all the containers managed outside in their parking lot. They had no security concerns because we took care of that. And it was basically away from them, and it meant that they could focus on what they wanted to focus on, which was selling their, goods and groceries. Also, what wasn't mentioned is when I was there, we'd also piloted what we called Express Plus facilities. So these are standalone storefronts, cashless, so it only included express containers. So you had to drop off your containers in bags. They would be counted there, and then you would get the refund uploaded to your phone or to your to our online portal, and you'd be able to access your money there. And those facilities would also include other materials that could be dropped off. So electronics, small appliances, lights and light bulbs, batteries, all those items could be dropped off at the same facility, which is, for a lot of people was great, especially in an urban environment, having like a small 700 to 1,000 square feet facility that not only took beverage containers, but all these other materials as well. I think was really a welcome welcome new service to have in their own communities. And the Return It brand was, it's been around for almost 30 years, and so really well known, and it has a 99% consumer awareness. In terms of coexisting with the packaging program, Recycle BC is British Columbia's packaging and paper EPR program. Sometimes residents place deposit materials in Recycle BC's recycling program before going the deposit. Tons collected by Recycle BC, including beverage containers, would be, so what we would do is on a monthly basis, so we would have an arrangement, we had an arrangement between Return It and Recycle BC, whereby the beverage containers collected in their program would be returned to the deposit program. Typically that involved an auditing process whereby every month there'd be 150 plus audits of the material coming into the program. From there would be a sub-audits of the beverage containers collected in the program. And from there, we would establish how many beverage containers were actually collected in the residential recycling. And we would claim those containers as our own, and we would pay deposits to Recycle BC. The other thing to note, another way that the programs work together is private depots, as I discussed before, often collected materials on behalf of other stewardship programs. One of those would have been Recycle BC's program. So a number of the bottle depots in this program, 163 private depots, would include materials such as styrofoam and flexible plastics as part of the materials they collect through these facilities. Lessons learned in British Columbia, 2 beverage container deposit programs in BC. So one of the things we have is we have 2 container programs. We have Return It, and then the beer industry has its own program, and it's created a lot of consumer confusion, operational challenges, and inefficiencies. So having one deposit program, definitely what you want. The the program in BC in return it has relied on a visible container fee as a way to ensure appropriate financial stability for the program to withstand market fluctuations in commodities. Some of the materials collected in these programs can have wide swings of commodity value, and certainly anyone in recycling in the last year has seen huge swings in value from material of all sorts, and it's created real operational impacts. So rather than having to have the deposit fee be adjusted all the time, in addition to a deposit, there's usually a CRF used in the BC system. That's a fee that's adjusted annually, and it allows to ensure that the system has appropriate financial reserves and financial stability to be able to keep the program operating and make sure that it runs in a way that's critical to ensuring that it can collect enough containers. The partnership with retailers is crucial as they increasingly look to get traffic back to their stores, but do not want to be involved in the operational aspects of taking back UBCs or used beverage containers. And that goes to what I talked about before, which is people want this. I think retailers want to do their part and ensure that the containers they sold or the product they sold, that the empty containers can be returned, but it also creates a range of operational impacts for them. And they found things like the Express and Go as a much more palatable option in terms of, and from a consumer perspective, the convenience was outstanding. To be able to drop off their containers in the same time they're going to the grocery store just meant one less trip in the car, and I think gave them the kind of convenience they're accustomed to, in terms of being able to find a way to safely and conveniently ensure that this material can be collected and recycled, and then on top of it, get the value back to them in terms of an online account that they can access 24/7. So in terms of summary insights, so collaborating with bottle programs encourages synergies and reduces the administrative burden on producers. Producers need to be industry controlled with clear performance targets and accountability. Excuse me, I'm having some problems reading. There we go. With clear performance targets and accountability for both industry and the regulator. So all the programs I've talked about, both circular materials, Return It, Recycle BC, and even CBCRA, one of the common denominators is they're all industry run, all governed by an industry-led board. And really that governance should be transparent. So there must be clear lines of accountability, and you need to leverage the participation of independent directors that are appointed to address gaps. And I think that's a big thing for me. I've worked on a few boards now, and having independent directors I think is essential on an industry board. It ensures that they bring a wider perspective than just industries, but also make sure that you have appropriate skill set, because these organizations are responsible for managing millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so you need to ensure that you have the appropriate skill set, because these folks, these folks are fiduciaries for this organization, and they need to make decisions in the right to the long-term future of the organization, but also take into account just the amount of money and the amount of responsibility that they're trying to manage. I would also suggest that advisory boards are beneficial and provide an opportunity for local governments, service providers, trade associations to provide feedback on creation and operation of the program. So in all my dealings in this area over the last 15 plus years, in all the programs we had advisory boards, and we tried to use those as a sounding board to make sure that we're getting information about the program and adjustments we could make to make the program more effective. And I found that as we've gone through, in my experience, we've had lots of feedback from the advisory boards and sort of evolved that model, where we started to include them in our stewardship plan consultation approach, in that we would use them as a first step. So let them comment on our stewardship plan and give us feedback before we released it to the public, as a way to kind of test run some of the thinking we had as a stewardship agency with a small group of, invested and engaged stakeholders. And I found that really beneficial. So over time, what I found, advisory boards are great, but they also need to have a tangible role. And I don't think that tangible role necessarily needs to be set up in legislation, but it's more the responsibility of the producer responsibility organization to figure out, how can I engage these people? What's the framework I need to set up, and how can I ensure that they have a meaningful role? Because it's really hard for people to be engaged and provide really, first of all, it's hard to get good people, and it's hard to have them engaged if there's not a meaningful role for them. And so I think the one thing that we were always open to was working with the advisory boards to evolve their role and their responsibilities to ensure that we could keep good people and keep them engaged. So that's the end of my presentation. Sorry if I went a little bit over, but happy to take part in any Q&A. Thank you very much. I'll somehow stop sharing my screen. Or maybe
Yep,
you guys have done it for me.
we've already done it. And
Okay, perfect.
thank you very much for a terrific presentation, and thank everybody for a terrific presentation this afternoon. I think we've all learned so much about the programs and where the opportunities are. We have received some questions, and I've been trying to figure out where the questions land from all of our participants. We'll start with Peter. There are two questions here that are sort of related. Number one is from Reinhild Davis and Annika Bergen, wanting both know where to get more information on the drop centers, or their convenient resources. And then secondly, can residents leave their containers curbside under the program, or do they have to go to the drop-off centers?
Okay, yeah, so the first one, just if people just want to Google Oregon bottle drop, you'll get to all the information that the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative has on the bottle drop programs, or you can just Google Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative and find they've upgraded their website and they have a lot of information about what they're doing there. We are unlike California and what we just heard described in Ontario, in that when people put their beverage containers, their deposit beverage containers in the curbside program, they can do that, but they forfeit the deposit and the hauler does not get the deposit either. They just are recycling that as aluminum, glass, or plastic, and they do not get a deposit based on that.
Thank you for that. We got a question for Heidi, wanting, this is from Catherine Abel, asking if a national bottle bill does succeed, gets enacted, how does that affect, what would you anticipate the impact being on state programs, state bottle bills?
I think the way it's been drafted and the way I think there's broad support is that the existing programs are not preempted. But over time, the producers are very, very interested, obviously, in harmonizing some key parts of the program, such as labeling and the deposit amount, because we've got states that have, as you saw in the recycling rate of 2%, basically zero infrastructure. And then you have some like Washington State that didn't get their bottle bill passed this year, so they have but quite a bit of infrastructure. You can't expect those two states to start at the same place or have the same targets. They won't be able to hit it. So what we envision is that there'd be a PRO organization by state, and they would feed into the national, and the national would be responsible for the rates and the targets, and they would be able to work with the states, starting where they are and harmonizing over time. Things like the deposit, some states could not start at 10 cents. They've never even seen a deposit. They don't know what that feels like, but 5 cents seems like a lot to them, or 10, 15, even up to 20 in some states might be just fine. It just depends on what the politics are and the people will put up with in that state, so it can support. So that's the way it would look. It would probably look a lot like the paint care program does right now, where it's got like 7 or 10 states, I think. I can't remember how many anymore, but they have different kind of programs, sub-programs by state, and then they feed into a national organization. And then if states wanted to opt into the national and thought, well, I don't need to run mine anymore, they're doing such a great job, we could just give ours up, then that would be their option, but they wouldn't be forced into that.
Thank you for that. Alan, we got a question from Yanis Siligakis in terms of, during your presentation, he wanted to know how much per container do recyclers get? And he was comparing it to the 5 cent per container experience that obviously is viewed as insufficient in a number of states. So he was curious in terms of what the rate is up there. And then also, you got a question from Lori about what happens to flexible containers.
Yeah, great question. So when I was CEO of Return It, we actually standardized the deposit level at 10 cents. And we did that. We used to have 5, 10, and 20, and we went to a standard 10 because it just made the program more efficient. We're having to do all these different sorts. Like I think when I started, we had 32 different sorts of containers. When I left, it was down to 8. And when you're dealing with 1 billion containers, having to sort them out in the least amount possible, this leads to some natural efficiencies. So we had 10 cents. Keep in mind that the payment to the recyclers is different. So that's the payment to the consumer. Recyclers on average got 5 cents per container. So they received, so for every container that a bottle depot handled for us, they received on average 5 cents a container. Pretty solid business from my perspective. And a number of them were able to leverage that in a very successful business. The flexible plastics were a huge challenge, and they remain a huge challenge. So we had all sorts of different projects and pilots we tried. One of the challenges for us is because they were a small number of containers, we didn't have a lot of scale to work with. And so, we had done things like work with plastic lumber and other sorts of options. Look, there's still a lot of work, even in my current job. We're going to be doing a request for expression of interest later this year, particularly around flexible plastics. The management of flexible plastics remains an outstanding issue, particularly these multi-material ones. We don't have a commercial scale recycling solution right now, and we want to work through various partners to find a solution that will work.
Thank you. This next question is a little bit for Peter, and it might go to Heidi. It goes to the operations in both Oregon and California. David McLaughlin wanted to know what a little more detail, the role of government in the Oregon program, and specifically, do the unclaimed deposits pay for the government's role in it? And then there was also a question about what happens to unclaimed deposits in California.
Yeah, let's start out with Oregon. We differ from almost all the other states in that the state is not involved at all in the finances under the bottle bill. In other words, the money just goes between the consumer, the store, and the distributor and Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative. The state does not have any handling fee, any claim on unredeemed deposits. It does put a little kind of a negative incentive there, in that if the system is made more difficult, distributors get to keep more unredeemed deposits, but they realize politically that would not fly. And so they're still pushing hard to push the redemption rate up, even though it means that the distributors don't get to keep as much in the terms of unclaimed deposits. Those unclaimed deposits are used for financing the system, for paying for the redemption centers and the other operations, because after all, you don't make money on a redemption center when there's no handling fee. All the money that OBRC invests and all the money that grocery stores invest in running those things goes to running them. They don't get anything back from them other than fulfilling the responsibilities they have, to be proper stewards. So anyway, that answers the first question. There is one small fee paid to, it's not my agency, it's the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, which administers the law. And there is a small fee paid to them that pays for their expenses in, for instance, in approving redemption centers and their oversight role. But very, very small amount of money goes that way. For many years, they had just one staff doing part-time on that. At the moment, I think they have 2 staff because there's been a lot of increase in activity recently. And again, my time on bottle bill is very limited. We don't have my agency, Department of Environmental Quality, has no role in the law. So anyway, and I just want, this is unrelated to that question, but I just want to point out, because I forgot to, the Oregon EPR law does cover commercial as well as residential. Where we purposely did that because there's so much material, done commercially, and of course there's so many businesses that operate out of small scale, out of homes and so on, that we wanted to make sure that all this material was going to be covered, not try to figure out, this residential stuff's covered but the commercial is not. We want it all to be properly recycled.
Thank you. And Heidi, anything on the California?
Well, as we've not had enough collection locations, the amount of unclaimed deposits has gone up and our recycling rate has dropped. In fact, last year, the state actually proposed doubling the amount people were getting back temporarily. That did not go over well. They didn't get it because they had $600 million just sitting there in the account. I honestly, I would talk to Susan Collins about the details. She tracks them way more carefully than I do on exactly where all that unclaimed deposits go. All I can tell you is that we're not, to me, I always want to see unclaimed deposits go back into the program to achieve the goals of the program. I don't think it should be, it goes to anybody else, because the problem is right now we have a bit of a perverse incentive in that that money does go back to some folks who do not. Why should you increase the recycling rate if you get some of that back, right? I mean, I want to see the program get better. And if it's not at 100%, then there's got to be something more we can do. So that's increase the, a public education about the program, or put out more collection locations, or increase the deposit, or how much they're paying for collectors to collect more, so, or keep their hours open more. There's so many things we could do, but I think the deposits need to go back to the producers with clear earmarks. They've got to get used to improve the program and achieve the goals. And Alan, I'd love to hear if you agree with that, because that would be interesting for me.
You'd love to hear what I think about the California program?
No, about whether the unclaimed deposits go back to the producers to, in California, it stays with government, and that's a whole nother problem. But in the producer-run programs, if the producers were required to use that for improving the program, hit the goals, wouldn't that be a good thing?
And in the certainly in the BC programs and the other programs in Canada, all the unredeemed deposits go back to the program. But it's also the program's responsibility to basically pay all the costs. So there's no government subsidies, there's no government funding. And I think that's really the way you want it to be. I always get concerned. Governments always have great intentions, but the minute you start giving them access to money, they tend to do the wrong thing sometimes, especially if they have a crunch of their own. So I think there needs to be clear separation, and you want that money out of government hands as much as possible.
And I can tell you that's happened in California multiple times, where the legislature has grabbed that pot of money, like a little pot of gold, when they came up against tough financial times. I've also seen it go somehow to the tire program and some all kinds of weird stuff over the last 25, 30 years. So I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I think that makes the public cynical, right? Because then they're worried that, I think the public support for deposit programs in Canada has been because people know that they're paying that deposit, that it's going, I'm sure it's the same in Oregon, Peter, that deposit is going to pay to run a top-notch, well-run program where they can be sure that they've got good access to return their containers, and they could get the deposit back. And I think, so I think that's why it's so important.
We certainly have had efforts to go after the unclaimed deposits for many, many different programs. To date, they've all been unsuccessful. The distributors have very successfully lobbied to say that, hey, we need this money to keep our program going. If you pull this away, it's going to really hurt us.
Yeah.
So we're continuing to get great questions here. This one, Alan, if this comes from Todd Bukowski, who asks, in Ontario, are most curbside programs single stream, like in a lot of the US, or are there multiple stream, paper separate from plastic by consumer? Do you see the blue box system changing one way or another?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're about half and half between dual stream and single stream. I think that if there's a push to, so it's a concern for us, because I think in single stream, we're not getting the same quality as we do in the dual stream. I think that's without a doubt. The challenge is on the labor front. Like every industry, we're challenged for labor. And to do a dual stream system, you need a driver and a swamper, someone that's getting out and actually manually putting that material into the truck. So I think we're going to in the future have to look at, is there a way to do dual stream in a more automated way? Because it's challenging enough to get drivers for these single stream vehicles where they have a little joystick and it's basically all automated for them. Getting drivers and swampers where those folks know they're going to have hard work ahead of them is super challenging, especially in this labor environment. I don't know what it's like in the States, but you cannot hire enough people here, and managing your labor is probably your number one issue. So I think that's the risk going forward, but right now it's still 50-50, and there's no doubt right now the quality of the dual stream is much higher than the single stream material.
Thank you for that. Heidi, you're got another question about the National Bottle Bill effort, and it comes from Dana Villeneuve. And it's, can you speak more to the National Bottle Bill's viability and what the strategy is for getting it passed? What are co-sponsors, I assume Republican co-sponsors, are being targeted? How are waste haulers and other stakeholders with reservations about these policies being engaged, and other kind of strategic and tactical issues like that?
Well, I don't dig too much into my strategery, but I will say that there's been a lot of outreach over the last few years. As you know, there was a bottle bill in the Break Free from Pollution bill. That was kind of a giant behemoth of a bill. It had everything from flushable wipes labeling to all kinds of plastics, you know, banning new facilities and things like that. And it introduced the concept. We're pulling pieces out. I say Christmas trees with too many ornaments do not pass. You have to take some of the ornaments off and lighten it up. So that is where Break Free was. It was just too big. So the wipes bill we're pulling out, that's being lobbied separately for truth in labeling because they're plastic and they get into the water. The same thing is happening with the bottle bill, and Senator Merkley's leading both of those things. And excuse my dog, something is going on.
Yeah.
UPS. So the bottle bill, this has been a discussion separately for a while now, and we're going to be introducing it. As I said, there's been his staff has been doing kind of concentric circles, one-off conversations with everybody from retailers to NGOs. And I've been doing the same. Others have been doing the same. There's a large coalition of the willing. I would say you're going to end up with 5% of people on the far left and the far right pretty much every time you run a bill. With SB 54, that was the case. And so unfortunately, they get left behind. You have to negotiate. You have to talk to everybody at the table. And some people have told me, well, you shouldn't talk to this group. You shouldn't talk to that group. They don't care. They don't. Well, that's not how it works. The first thing legislators ask us is, who have you talked to? What are they saying? How are you addressing their concerns? And so I feel like we're finding the middle, and I have to thank the manufacturers who are stepping up. In fact, I wish I had it with me. It's downstairs. I was at a Pepsi event. They just rolled out the first 21 electric trucks yesterday here in Sacramento County from Tesla, and long haul vehicles, but they also showed off their new refilling stations for beverages that are going to go into colleges and high schools across the country. So they're moving into refilling. They're leaning in on recycled content. They're leaning in on supporting bottle bills because they, as Alan said, they can't get enough material for the next generation of products if they don't. And I know the can manufacturers are lobbying and saying, we're hostage to Chinese magnesium to make the sheets for the cans because we don't have it here unless we mine it back from the public. So I think all these things are coming together. I think after COVID, we learned supply chain is a problem when everything is, across the sea and on a boat. It doesn't always work. And so we need to keep some critical infrastructure here at home and bring the recycling home and the jobs with them. So we are doing a lot of outreach. If you're interested, let us know. You can go to americasbottlebill.com and sign up there, and we'll keep you.
I think we only have time for one or two more questions. We're closing in at the end of our time. And once again, thank you for your consideration. But we did get a question from Megan Lane about, for states, and I suppose this could be open to any of the panelists that wants to answer this. For states that do not have EPR or a bottle bill, what are some of the considerations or recommendations you would give to legislate both programs together?
So is the premise then that it go together at the same time?
Yeah,
one?
It could be that people are asking advice if you're one of those jurisdictions that does not have either. I think, can you do both at the same time? If so, what considerations would you want to
I'll
take?
answer first, and then let I am sure Peter and Alan have something to weigh in on here. My recommendation is, first of all, you have to know your legislature and know if they're ready, and the stakeholders. We've spent literally 15 years in California educating our stakeholders and then the legislators to get to the place where we could take on EPR for packaging. It is the biggest, hardest thing you will do. And if you do it wrong, there can be a lot of problems. So we've had a lot of EPR bills that came first so that they understood, here's the problem, that was the problem, we got to fix this. We've done some fix-it bills, and then we're comfortable taking on the big one. But if you haven't done that and you haven't done a bottle bill, I would not say necessarily start even with packaging. I would say start with something small, or maybe try the bottle bill, because that's about 4% of the waste stream, or try something like the paint care program or the mattress program. You know, something that's got a lot of states already going in that direction, and they've got an established PRO, and they kind of can help, because otherwise you may not be ready. And if it goes wrong, like I say, if you pass a bad bill, and I can tell you the carpet bill in California, we were on the edge. Do we want to support this? Because it's got a lot of problems. It has caused so much trouble. And we've had to fix it twice, and it's still not fixed. We're fixing it the third time. This time it's going to be flipped on its head, I hope. But be careful. Be careful. Don't take on more than you can really do well. It's very hard to do. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody.
I'll be very succinct in my response. I think they should take the packaging first. I think there's a lot of producers now that are sort of galvanizing. I think the Colorado experiment, in terms of legislation passed there, might be a good template. But I think producers are interested if they're going to be captured on these programs and making sure that there's the right bills in place. And so I think there's a lot of momentum right now, and the state should take advantage of that momentum. And then you can figure out, can beverage containers be collected through some sort of ancillary system through the blue box, or do you need a deposit system as well?
Perfect.
So we disagree on that, just to be clear.
But I would say we have different viewpoints, Heidi, but I think we always find ways to get around that.
Right. No, it's a friendly disagreement. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's friendly.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think we'll pass a bottle bill the way Oregon did back in 1971, because, you know, when we passed that, we had a refillable system in place already. You know, most people were returning beverage containers back then. It was common, you know, the grocers were accepting them, so there wasn't the sort of issues you have now. I think if we were to pass a bottle bill in the future someplace, it will be something more closely related to what Oregon's program is now, where the distributors get together and figure out a good way to set up redemption centers and fund a program that get these containers back without, you know, requiring the grocers to, because the grocers would certainly oppose it, since they aren't taking, you know, in most states they have no role in taking containers back. So I think we would need an independent system set up for getting those containers back, such as we've seen with you have the Turn It Up there, and we have with our bottle drop programs down here.
Right. It's 3:30. That's a great note to end on, all these thoughts and you know, the considerations. Once again, I really want to thank Peter Spendelow, Heidi Sanborn, Alan Langdon for terrific presentations and for your answers to a number of questions. You can see the great interest in this topic. This material will be available on our website. We take a few days to get it published and put up there. But once again, thank you to the presenters, and thank everybody for joining, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having us.